Hi everyone. So we're up to, I think it's session 8, and we're in chapter 7 of Ecclesiastes. And I just want to do a little bit of a recap before I enter some dangerous waters. So we've seen in Ecclesiastes so far that the key theme is everything is Hebel, or trying to shepherd the wind, trying to control what we cannot control. And our lives are the briefest of breaths. So that's the key theme. That's, if you will, the drumbeat of Ecclesiastes. Secondly, that creation keeps turning over, that there's a rhythm to creation, and creation lasts, whereas we merely pass through it. And secondly, there are seasons that we pass through too, which we can't control. So secondly, that life is relentless, and the term he occasionally uses is crooked, like we can't set it. It's got its own shape, and the seasons that we face and the rhythms of creation don't bend to us. Thirdly, he's acknowledged his pursuit of happiness and that he wants the good life, the happy life. And he's tried to achieve it through partying and folly, or through achievement. And none of this has brought satisfaction, but he has found satisfaction at the meal table with family. He's touched that good thread. And he has found satisfaction in realizing that God is God and he's not. But the last thing is which we saw last week and the week before, is this underbelly of oppression, where injustice is the mark of life on earth amongst humans, not truth and not community, but the misuse of power, which makes life on earth distasteful and unpleasant to the writer of Ecclesiastes and to ourselves. So the first half of Ecclesiastes ended, I noted last week, at verse 9. This is in the Hebrew text. It says this is the end of the first half. That better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of desire. This is also a vanity and chasing after wind. So back to this drumbeat of Hebel, of shepherding the wind. But if we can just find satisfaction with our eyes, with the things that we see, rather than the wandering of our desire here, there, and everywhere, then we just might have a chance of experiencing the good life. This passage ends with, "For who knows what is good for mortals while they live on the few days of their vain or brief life, which they pass like a shadow? For who can tell them what will be after them under the sun?" And remember, under the sun means life without God. This world where life operates in its own way, this sense of the absence of God pervades our lives. And who knows? Who knows what's good for mortals? And the answer is actually God. God knows what's good for mortals, but we sure as heck don't know what's good for us. So we come to chapter 7, and having returned to this drumbeat of Hebel, 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 and everything is the briefest of breaths, and we can't shepherd the wind. It's very interesting how this chapter starts, and we can be skillfully misled by our teacher of Ecclesiastes. But before I get into the chapter, I want to highlight the backdrop of Solomon here, because I noted that in chapters 4 and 5, he moves to much more being like an Old Testament prophet, in the posture of a prophet, railing against oppression, railing against self-deceit, and now I think he's returning to the Solomon. He's got the Solomon hat on again. In 1 Kings chapter 3, there's this key introduction to Solomon. He's become king. We're told that he establishes the kingdom, and then the first thing he does in this chapter is marry Pharaoh's daughter. We're actually told she lives in Bethlehem, David's city, until he builds a palace. I think from memory, it takes about 13 years to build the palace. So she lives apart from him for a long time. I presume he's ruling his capital. He's doing all his building projects, building the temple, all that sort of stuff. And there is Pharaoh's daughter somewhere else until an appropriate dwelling place is built for her. His first wife is Pharaoh's daughter. And then it says, Solomon loved the Lord. So it's quite contradictory. He marries Pharaoh's daughter, something that was against Torah for him. And then it says he loves the Lord, and he'd go to Gibeon, which was where the Ark of the Covenant was often kept. And he would make sacrifices until the temple was built there. 1,000 sacrifices. And just want to note that word 1,000, because it seems to be Solomon's number. Then at Gibeon, God appears to him, and God says, what do you want? And he asks for the one thing he wants most, which is wisdom. And God says, well, I'll give you wealth, I'll give you everything because you've asked for wisdom. And so the rest of the chapter shows just Solomon's wisdom emerging. And then it brings us to the point where he eventually has now 1,000 wives, and he's built this awesome kingdom. He has this crazy life of pleasure and foolishness. He actually imports monkeys, apes. You know, he's surrounding himself with everything that will entertain him, and so that narrative is clearly in the passages around Solomon. But I think we're meant to feel his memory and remember that Solomon wrote most of the Proverbs that are in the book of Proverbs. And so at the start of chapter 7, I think we're meant to feel like we're in the courts of Solomon as he expounds Proverbs. And as we read this, we feel like this is that the writer of Ecclesiastes is batting with a straight bat, to use a cricket term. He's playing straight shots because they look the straightest of shots. So I'll just read the first few verses. I'm not going to read all of the Proverbs, but it just says this: a good name is better than precious ointment in the day of death than the day of birth. It's better to go to the house of mourning than go to the house of feasting, for this is the end of everyone, and the living will lay it to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by sadness of countenance the heart is made glad. And the heart of the wise is in the house of the mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. It is better to hear the rebuke of the wise than to hear the song of fools, and for the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of fools. This also is vanity. He very quickly goes pretty dark, and Kidner, in terms of his commentary on this passage, he says, the first proverb is provocatively cheerless. I'll read it again. A good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of birth. Now, I don't know about you, but I mean, we've had a couple of grandchildren arrive. We've had 4 kids arrive. And the day of a birth is unbelievably happy and joyous and reorientates life. Because this life is precious and it's celebration. And he's saying, nah. Day of death is better, because he goes on to say, mourning's better than feasting and sorrow is better than laughter. He is basically saying funerals and mourning and fasting is the good option, and the celebration of birth and laughter and feasting, this is not the way. I want to suggest we're being played here. He's already said that the table, celebrating fellowship, everything like that, is the good life. To be satisfied and to be at the table with family and friends. He's already offered this as a key element of the good life. So what is he doing here? I think there is some truth that in moments of loss, life gets stripped to its basics and we evaluate. But I've done a lot of funerals, and I've seen no huge transformations in lives there. It's a nice thought that at the graveside we really evaluate our lives. I remember someone who was head nurse at the hospice said there's no such thing as an end of life conversion. People die as they lived. But it is true that in moments of death, we reevaluate our lives and ask what matters. And we listen to this story of a person's life often, and we think this was their good contribution. Sometimes we suspect that the full story is not being told, but that's another thing. I think in writing these things, the writer of Ecclesiastes is presenting wisdom as an extreme path. You know, that, and he's presenting not a balanced picture, but the extremism of wisdom and the pursuit of wisdom. And he goes on to say something interesting in verse 11. He says, wisdom is as good as an inheritance and advantage to those who see the sun. For the protection of wisdom is like the protection of money. And the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom gives life to the one who possesses it. So here he's saying something kind of telling, I think, about wisdom. He's saying that wisdom is as good as an inheritance because it gives us an advantage. And you have to say that this is true for those who are educated, for those whose families pass on life codes that are wise. It's an advantage. That doesn't make it right or wrong, it just is. You've got a better chance of succeeding in life and doing well under the sun if you have wisdom. And so I think, cynically says the protection of wisdom is like the protection of money, i.e. it insulates you away from life and makes you less exposed to life, and it gives you an advantage. Now, you'll have noticed that all the way through the book of Ecclesiastes, he's very cynical about advantage, and that ultimately it doesn't matter. And we'll see that this is the case in a minute. But we feel like we're in the wisdom literature. We feel like we're in Solomon's Proverbs here. And if we do this, this will happen. And when you read the book of Proverbs, you know, the way of the righteous is, you know, is blessed by the Lord. The way of the unrighteous is hard. And we look at those two paths, they're black and white. We think it's clear, clear, clear. This is the way it is. And I think he's playing this out. He's pretending to be Solomon, and he is giving this seriously harsh, narrow wisdom. And then he throws a spanner in the works entirely. And then he says in verse 13, consider the work of the Lord. Who can make straight what he has made crooked? So he returns to this thing that the world is not straight. So even though you have got wisdom, that doesn't mean that you can navigate the seasons. That doesn't mean you can navigate creation. That doesn't mean you can navigate God and have advantage before God, because it's not straight. It's crooked. It's not in your control, even though you might have wisdom. And so he concludes in verse 14, in the day of prosperity be joyful, and in the day of adversity consider God has made one as well as the other, so that mortals may not find out anything that will come after them. I.e., even if you have wisdom, you don't have advantage, not in a lasting God sense, because the day of adversity is going to come. Hard is going to come. Now, this cynical questioning of methodology, what he's saying is that you can pursue wisdom, and some as Christians pursue the saved life, the narrow life, thinking this method, this way of living will give me everything I want. And then we end up with a difficult question: why do bad things happen to good people? that becomes a big crisis thing, because we actually believe we've cracked the system. We know how it is. If I do this, God will bless that. And we put our confidence in a methodology. I don't know about you, but I've been sold a pack of methodologies over my life, you know, in terms of the things that you do, which will give you that. If we pray, God will answer our prayers. If we do this, that will happen. If we keep the word like this, these blessings will follow. And there is elements of truth in that. I'm not saying it's untrue, but we have this strange ability to believe our methodologies and our theological constructs and not see God himself. And we end up believing our belief rather than worshipping our God. This was tellingly explained to me once when Carolyn came home after and she'd been talking to some of her workmates, and they talked about someone who they said died a bad death. And they were a pastor who believed he should be healed, and he refused to die well. He was fighting for healing until he breathed his last breath. And he completely believed that the scriptures told him he was going to be healed, so he was convinced he would be healed. And so nobody ever talked about his death. I had a friend who similarly approached this. He refused to acknowledge he was dying until he died, which was profoundly damaging to his family. And what we're being told here, in the day of prosperity, be joyful, and the day of adversity, consider. God made them both. And our inability to face life and reality, life under the sun sometimes, because we believe our methodologies more than we believe in God. Evangelicals are particularly vulnerable to this. We love to create systems or schemes, and he's going to challenge schemes soon. But I hope you can hear what I'm saying. We are so vulnerable to form constructs that are our substitutes for God, because they help us understand life and make sense of life. But what the writer of Ecclesiastes is saying is life doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. It's crooked. Now we hit the trickiest passage in this. I mean, in some ways, I want to rescue the writer of Ecclesiastes, because he's so darn naughty in this passage. But we're being played, I think. And we're being forced to wrestle with what he wants us to wrestle with. He says this: in my vain, my hebel life, my brief life, I have seen everything. There are righteous people who perish in their righteousness, and there are wicked people who prolong their life in evil doing. Do not be too righteous, and do not act too wise. Why should you destroy yourself? Do not be too wicked, and do not be a fool. Why should you die before your time? It is good that you should take hold of the one without letting go of the other. For he who fears God shall succeed in both. What do you think of that? Now, for those of you who take the Bible very literally and like to think this, he's playing with a straight bat, you're in big trouble here, because basically he's saying, okay, there's wise and there's foolish, there's righteous and there's wicked, and stay somewhere in the middle and you'll be fine. When I first read this, I thought, you beggar, you're being a smart aleck, and I've had to really wrestle with what this is saying. I was on a Zoom call last night. I noticed an email in my inbox yesterday. I don't usually look at emails on a Sunday, but I just happened to notice one of my old basketball mates had sent me an email and said there was a school reunion Zoom. So about 10 of us were on Zoom last night, and it was so interesting just catching up with some old schoolmates. and so many of their memories were around parties. And one of them who regularly streaked at the parties, and on it went. And there was a bit of hilarity, reflecting on younger times now that we're all about 60, and I couldn't participate because I never went. I remember going to one party and there was a lot of drugs, and there was it was just a whole lot going on, and I never went again. So I kept these friends all the way through university. We used to hang out through university as well, and I really encountered God while I was at university. But even before that, I'd grown up in a home that was damaged by, my father's family was really damaged by alcohol. So it was just like one of those things that our family was really different on. And now I was in the world with my friends, and I couldn't really participate fully in their lives because of the separation I felt I had to have. Now, I suspect that protected me in some ways, but I was never really tempted by that lifestyle. I could just see through it as just pure escapism and stupidity, folly, if you will. But what he's saying here is, why be too righteous? You actually have to live in the world. And I think my generation of Christians have been really good at separating ourselves from the unrighteous, from what we regard as wicked. We're really good at being Pharisaical, because that's what Pharisees were like. Jesus wasn't. He feasted, and he was able to be in social environments that we would probably find uncomfortable as Christians. It's been interesting watching the younger generation react to what we did. They're very casual with alcohol and very casual in lots of areas of their lives. So the pendulum swung from this extreme of separation from the world so we don't get unclean to not really seeing much different between the world and being Christian, and these are extreme swings. And the writer of Ecclesiastes is saying, why go to the extreme? You have to live in the world of wickedness. You just do, because it's sinful, it's crooked. You have to be there. So don't be too damn righteous to be in this world. But also don't be too wise either, and too smart, because wise people are just patronizing. They think they know better than everybody else. So, because there's so much foolishness in the world, find a way to inhabit the world without being extreme. There are a lot of Christians who are no fun to be with. Way more fun to be with pagans. Why? Because they're just so right. They're so painfully pure. And I don't think they would like Jesus very much, some of these people, because Jesus actually lived effectively in the world of impurity and wickedness. And as a righteous person, of all the people who are righteous, he was the one who could be offended and affronted. But he wasn't. He was able to inhabit that space and not feel the need to separate himself from that space. Not because he was tempted by it, but because he saw through it. And I regret that I did not live in that space better, that I felt the need to be too righteous. I think that's what he's saying here. He's saying, don't be too righteous and don't be too wise. Now, he's not giving us the right to sin here, but he is giving us room to navigate, I think, in terms of black and white boundaries are not where it's at. What he's saying is there is a balance here, that we're in a sinful world, we're in a crooked world. And if you want to be too righteous, too wise, there's no place for you. You actually have to isolate yourself. And nobody wants you around anyway. You're just a pain. In Proven's commentary of this says, the fear of God sets boundaries within which the mortal life should be lived out. So he does land on this one, for the one who fears the Lord shall succeed in both, i.e. if we reverence God, we'll be able to navigate this world of extremes, of people who are into extreme wickedness and people who are into extreme righteousness. There is a middle path of living in the fear of God there. And I think that's what the writer of Ecclesiastes is saying. I'm not saying he's saying it easily. In fact, if you read him literally, this is troublesome. But I actually think he's presented wisdom as an extreme path, better funerals, better to mourn. And he's ridiculed it as just a safety method. And I think such righteousness is like that too. It's our safety method to make us feel safe. It's our currency to succeed, and that God will honour us and bless us. That was the view of the Pharisees anyway. They believed they would be delivered if they kept the law stringently enough. So it's good that you should take hold of one without letting go of the other. That's a really interesting thing to sort out. Okay, I'll leave you to process that one. He then goes on to say that wisdom gives strength to the wise, more than 10 rulers that are in a city. That sounds all good. He sounds like he's back on task with wisdom. And then he says, but surely there's no one righteous as to do good. So it sounds like he backs the wisdom extreme, and then he slams into the righteous extreme, because none of us are truly righteous. And now he's going to tell us none of us are truly wise. And verse 23 says, all this I have tested by wisdom. I said, I will be wise, but it was far from me. That which is far off and deep, very deep. Who can find it? I turned my mind to know and to search out and to seek wisdom and the sum of things, and to know that wickedness is folly and that foolishness is madness. What he says here is that he's failed. He chose this path, and the wisdom is too far off. Every time he seemed to get there, it's further away, and it's too deep. He couldn't fathom it. This is really, really interesting. In the New Testament, we're told that all wisdom is hidden in Christ in Colossians chapter 2. That we can't find true wisdom in itself. We have to find it in the person of God. And he's done this search, he's done this quest to seek wisdom and the sum of things, the scheme of things, to find out how to find a method to succeed, and he can't do it. He could have equally said this about righteousness. I pursued righteousness and the sum of things. And he couldn't do it. He's failed to find clinching, definitive answers that enable him to control life and to get the life he wanted on his own terms. Life under the sun, we can't do it. Now we hit what is the last section of this passage, and it's a doozy. Okay, so I'll just read it out and we'll face it squarely. I found more bitter than death the woman who is a trap, whose heart is snares and nets, whose hands are fetters. One who pleases God escapes her, but the sinner is taken by her. See, this is what I found, says the teacher, adding one thing to another to find the sum, or to find the scheme, which my mind has sought repeatedly, but I have not found. One man among 1,000 I found, but a woman among all these I have not found. See, this alone I found, that God made human beings straightforward, but they have devised many schemes. So this is a little bit uncomfortable because this brings gender issues in here, and these are highly sensitive things. So what I want to highlight, first of all, is he talks about more bitter than death is the woman who's a trap. And I think he's got a Solomon hat on here. And you might remember in Proverbs, there's a similar description which Solomon writes in there. And so I think this is him with a Solomon hat on, playing a game with us. But I think the game is Pharaoh's daughter. I think he is presenting her as the snare that took Solomon astray and crushed the life out of him. So he became a bureaucratic organizational leader who lost the heart of Torah brutally. So this presentation of this woman who basically is a trap and as fetters. Do want to say that sometimes relationships are like this. They actually are profoundly life-taking and life-inhibiting. And he is saying this is death. And to be overpowered by a person is an experience of death. And he is saying, one who pleases God escapes this. I think he's intentionally drawing the parallel of Pharaoh's daughter, who reshaped Israel. And as a result of her, he builds a temple to her, and then he marries somebody else, Moab, and he builds a temple to Moloch, and then to Shemosh, the Ammonite god. And through this, all of Israel is led astray. Death enters Israel. I think this is what's being touched on here. But I also think it's noteworthy that he uses the word 1,000. Solomon has 1,000 wives, and so he says that, and one man among 1,000 I found, but a woman amongst that number I haven't found. So I think he's playing out here the whole thing of 1,000 wives. They were all foreign wives. They were not the kind of, Solomon ignored the guidelines of Torah in terms of how he should have married, and they become death to him. But there's also something else being said here, adding to get one thing to another to find the sum. Part of what he's trying to understand here is he's saying he just doesn't understand people. He might understand one man in 1,000, but a woman he can't understand. And then he goes on to say this key thing, which is my favorite verse, I think, in Ecclesiastes. This alone I found, that God made human beings straightforward, but they devised many schemes. I think he's saying people are ultimately unfathomable, that woman completely unfathomable to him. And when you read Ecclesiastes, that makes sense. And many guys are bewildered by the relational complexity women have compared to the simplicity of being male. So we think anyway. We're a bigger mess than we think. We're not as simple as we like to think. But anyway, there you go. He's actually reflecting on the fact that human beings were straightforward, but they've had many schemes or sums, i.e. we really make heavy work of life, and so we end up with this emotional baggage, this mental baggage, this spiritual baggage. We carry all this scar tissue. We've got all these factors playing out in our lives, and we're so complex. And he's saying, I just don't get it. I don't get one man in 1,000 I can get that sum, but that's the only sum I can get. And women don't get. And I think this is because we go to extremes, and we all have our games that we play, and our lives are no longer straightforward. He is presented in this passage our tendency to go to extremes. Extreme wisdom, extreme righteousness. The other options are extreme folly and wickedness, because we can't navigate well honouring God in life. And so we come up with these methodologies. I'm going to be happy if I party. I'm going to be happy if I can find the wisdom that will lead to the good life, or whatever. All of our extreme paths are our schemes. Everyone's devised their schemes to feel good, to feel happy, but we lose the straightforward life being the God-loved, God-honouring life of knowing God and him knowing us and being happy with what we see with our eyes. The most repeated parable in Proverbs is an uneven balance is an abomination to the Lord. I think it's about 6 times it's repeated in the book of Proverbs, which is weird. But there is something about, the balances were kind of the two sides and holding two truths together, the balanced life. So God is righteous, but also God is gracious. God is love, but God judges. God is one, but God is three. We're saved by grace, but we're called to reveal that grace through works of grace. So all of these things require balance. Our tendency is to go for one and ditch the other. We tend to say, well, this is true, and so therefore that's untrue. Whereas actually the holding of truths together, holding things in tension and holding them there, is the balanced life. So I absolutely believe in community, but I also believe in my own personal accountability, and I have to hold these things together. It's not one or the other. It's both. It's both and. The truly righteous life is a balanced life of navigating the crooked world. And we can't stand apart from it. We can't stand above it because we know better. We have to enter it. And we have to learn to live a balanced expression of the life of God, because an untrue balance is an abomination. I'm amazed how black and white a lot of Christians are. They're so sure that they're right about everything. And I'm a little bit tarnished with that brush. I like to think I see things straight. But the writer of Ecclesiastes is really challenging us. I think we'll look softer if we learn to live a life that is truly balanced. And I think that's what we're called here to do, that there are boundaries through which truly good life can be lived. But we can't avoid the crookedness of this world. So may God bless you as you meditate on this untidy chapter. God bless you.